When I was a junior in high school, a kid in my grade ran away from home. Well, he drove away, and nobody knew what happened to him. We will call this guy Andy. He lived with his grandma, and she was asking around if anyone knew anything. We didn't. About a month later, he came back. I'd heard through friends that he'd just flipped out and decided to take off. I hadn't heard anything from him, though, so I didn't put too much faith in the gossip. I figured I'd hear it from him at some point. We weren't too close or anything. I'd stayed over at his grandma's house a few times when we were freshmen. I remember we played Shaq Fu and killed a huge tin of beef jerky. But as we got older, we were part of different crowds. Anyway, a short time after he got back, I was having a huge party for my birthday. My family had moved out of town a little, to a house we called the Peach House. It was a modular home that was cut open and added onto. It had a huge living room with a hot tub in it. There was a big-ass barn that was detached from the house, and my parents let me have my party out there. Different people showed up at different times, but I invited a lot of people, and he was one of them. We watched Cops Too Hot for TV, that still gets quoted by my best friend and I. Ate pizza, blasted music, and I remember we watched Dead Alive when we finally moved back into the house, after most people left. At the end of the night, there were only a few of us, the homies and Andy. Well, as it turns out, Andy asks if he can stay the night. I said sure, but I didn't really want him to. I remember being bummed out because my close friends weren't staying too. It was just a weird situation because we always stayed at each other's houses, and now I end up sitting there with Andy on my birthday. So everybody goes home and I get him set up on the ground next to my bed. Eventually the lights are off and we're talking about stuff, and I bring up the fact that he ran away. So he said he got pissed at his grandma or pissed about something. I don't even remember, but I remember this part. He was in California and was driving up the coast. It was the middle of the night, so he parked in some lot that was pretty close to the ocean and fell asleep. I was about to do the same at this point of the story. I was starting to drift away. The lot was empty when he parked, but when he woke up, there was an RV parked a couple spaces away from him. He stretches and noticed there are some people on the beach. They're sitting around a fire. They've made a fire pit with some bigger rocks. These 4 or 5 people stand up, standing in a circle around the fire. They're all wearing white robes. Andy is sitting in the driver's seat of his car, and the window is rolled down. He watches as one of them reaches down and grabs something. This guy walks over to Andy's car, and he's got a fucking fire poker in his hand. The end is red hot. It's been sitting in the fire. He said this guy was bald, but pretty young looking, like 25. He said the man wouldn't make eye contact with him, but stared just to the side of him. Andy said he was too scared to move. This guy then takes the glowing poker and stabs it into his own thigh. Andy said he could hear it sizzling and smell it. Well, the guy doesn't make a sound. He doesn't even make a face. He just keeps staring. Andy snaps out of it. He starts the car, rolls the window up, and reverses away from the man. He just stays there, staring the same direction, fire poker still in his thigh. Andy's telling me how he got the hell out of there, and I'm like wide awake now. I started to get a bit paranoid laying there in my bed. I played it off by saying, "That's crazy," and "holy shit," but I was pretty freaked out. I was like, why did he just tell me that? Was it true? It was such a weird story that I feel like it might have happened. Also, I realized that I don't really know anything about this guy, outside of hanging out with him a few times as a freshman. I also decided that this will be the last time he ever sleeps over. We remained friendly until graduation, but I was fine keeping my distance from him. A few years back, after a divorce, I ended up homeless and living in an RV for about a year. I was offered a job 3,000 miles away from my ex, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So my two small dogs and I started driving west. In western New Mexico, outside Albuquerque, we stopped at a native casino and RV park for the night. It was a very nice park. The bathhouse was huge and meticulously clean. The sort of place where tourists weren't allowed to feel uncomfortable while camping next to miles of wilderness desert in the middle of the reservation. I was just glad they didn't turn us away for being in a 40-year-old small RV. Other parks had. Turns out RV living is only okay if it's obviously a choice instead of a need. The next morning, I checked outside my door before letting my two small dogs out. There are a lot of things that would be happy to snack on a toy poodle. Sure enough, a coyote was exploring the area. I'm used to East Coast coyotes that will take off as soon as they see you're a full-sized human, so I hopped out, left my pups locked in, and made sure I didn't make eye contact as I went toward the bathhouse. I nodded and greeted him politely as I went by. He was still there when I came out. I told him it would be appreciated if he gave us some space so my kids could come out for their bathroom breaks before we got back on the road. He huffed at me and started walking down the dirt road out into the bush. After a few steps, he turned and looked back at me, so I followed behind him by about 30 feet or so. Just for the record, following a coyote into the desert at dawn probably wasn't the wisest decision to make. I was very careful not to leave the dirt road. There was a natural clump of 3 boulders about 10 to 12 feet tall, within easy eye shot of the casino. The coyote calmly walked around the rocks, and then from the other side, moving at the same casual pace, came an older native gentleman. His hair was in braids to his waist. He was wearing old jeans, blue gingham shirt, and a woven hat. He tipped his hat at me and kept walking east out into the bush. That was when a raven I hadn't seen started laughing at me from the top of the tallest boulder. The bird took off, flying east, and in the light of sunrise seemed to shift from black to white to orangey red in color. I wished them both a kind day, hoofed it back to the park, and broke camp in record time. Ravens and crows followed me for the entire time I lived on the West Coast. Even when I would walk to work, there were 3 that paced me every day. Now that I'm back on the East Coast, I kinda miss them. This happened about 26 years ago. My friend Jack and I were driving an RV, pulling an old truck bed conversion trailer to Yucca Valley, California. He made a deal with a friend of ours to trade his RV for a good running truck. We were driving on old Highway 247, where there was nothing, just flat sand and an occasional rock formation. I remember we passed a rolling sandhill, overlooking winding roads of nothing, and it was dark. We got a late start. I was lying on the side couch trying to take a nap when he called out for me to come up front and look at what he was seeing. They looked like lit balls of red fire, going up and down about a mile ahead of us, and they seemed to be coming in our direction. As they got closer, we noticed that about 4 of them bunched together, making one. Then 4 more joined them like they were intelligent. Jack slowed down because we were hoping they would go away, but they didn't. I opened the window, but we heard no sound, and then they just seemed to hover. Jack thought F it and started driving faster. That's when they all dispersed and flew towards a rock hill. At that point, Jack floored it because we were scared and freaking out. As we were driving, we heard a bang from the back of the RV, so I ran back there trying to keep my balance because Jack was driving like a bat out of hell. And when I looked out the window, I saw the trailer with something sparking flames in the middle of it. I turned my head to tell him, but by the time I turned back, there were flames right where the sparks were, and the red lights were gone. Absolutely gone. Jack pulled over and grabbed the small fire extinguisher by the stove. We stood by the door, but were too scared to go outside. With a few big exhales, he puffed up his chest and swung open the door. We ran out to the trailer. I had a big flashlight and was behind him. The flames were getting pretty big, lighting up the desert around us. It took a while to put it out. Jack jumped on the trailer to see what had caught it on fire, but all he found were shards of pointed metallic pieces strewn about, and a dent in the bottom of the trailer bed. I jumped on the trailer too, because I didn't want to be standing on the ground alone. Just then, we heard something about 40 feet behind us on the passenger side. I shined my light, but we didn't see anything. It was quiet, not a car or light in sight anywhere. We heard it again. It sounded like gravel, like when you scrape your shoe on dry dirt, but it was closer. Jack thought he saw something, so he took the flashlight. I, of course, was holding on to him so tight I could feel his heart thump through his rib cage. He shined the light over to where we heard the noise, and it looked like around 5 piles of sand, like little mounds in a row. The sound stopped. He asked me what I thought was going on, and I hadn't a clue. We were about to jump out of the trailer when we heard it again. Jack beamed the light and caught the flash of some reflective diamond-shaped eyes that quickly disappeared. Then those sandy dirt mounds started moving towards us, all at the same time, as if something small was pushing them from behind. Jack grabbed me. We jumped and ran toward the RV door. I don't think either one of us had ever run that fast. He put the RV in drive and we sped off. We heard things hitting the back, like rocks were being thrown at us, but we didn't stop. By the time we got to a small town, the RV was sputtering. Jack didn't understand why because it was in perfect shape before we left, so we pulled over to check the engine under a street light. He took a walk around. He saw that the tailpipe had been curled up, like it was folded up facing the back of the bumper. When he looked up, he saw all of the back window's screens were shredded, and the rubber around the glass was hanging. He took some tools and some gloves and straightened the pipe, and we drove a bit longer to our destination. We told our friend what had happened, but he didn't believe us. The next day when we woke up, our friend came in asking us what the hell we did to the RV, so we went outside. It looked like the glass was all etched with scratches, and we had no explanation as to what could have cut glass like that. Plus, there were dents on top and in the back. In one spot on the siding, there was what looked like an impression of 5 little fingers with nail holes at the end of them, and one wide thumb. Jack had to pay our friend for the damage to the RV, and we took his truck and drove the long way back home. We never talked about that to anyone else again. He kept a few of those metallic shards. He said that when he held it, it felt soft, but when he accidentally dropped it, it turned sharp and hard again. Jack told me that he had to get rid of them, because the more they were handled, he noticed his hands starting to blister, and he didn't want his kids to get a hold of them. I kick myself now because if I had known back then it was so significant, I would have asked him to let me keep them. 5 years ago it was daytime, and I was driving with my son in my small truck. We were following my ex in his car, and we ended up in that same spot. It didn't dawn on me until it was too late that we were going that way. I started to hyperventilate, and my son had to calm me down. You see, it was times like this that made me hate the desert. I live in Washington now. Door dashing late at night. Last time I ever do that again. I decided to start door dashing on the side. I started off by working 2 or 3 days a week doing 2-hour shifts. One night I was making so much money I wanted to see how much I could make if it was just busy hour after hour. I usually stop around 10, but I wanted to push through till midnight to hit the $2.50 mark. I receive an order from IHOP for a good payout, so I accept it without looking at the location of the drop-off. But from a quick glance I got a general idea of where it was. When I arrive at the restaurant, I get a phone call from the customer, asking if I could get her some smokes from the store. But I told her I don't do that while delivering. I didn't want to get into any legal trouble. She pauses for a few seconds, and then says if I don't get her cigarettes, her boyfriend is going to be upset because she smoked what he had left. I apologized and told her I was on the way with her food and I wouldn't be too long. She hangs up, frustrated, and I think nothing of it. When I look at exactly where I was heading, I see it's off of a loop in a house that I know for sure was burnt down. I called back to ask if the address was correct, but no answer. There were a few houses in that area, but they were about an acre apart. I get a call back from the same woman, and she says her dad owns the land and he let her put an RV out there. I saw nothing wrong with that, and I headed that way. When I pulled up, I got a weird feeling, because it was so dark, and the RV didn't even have any lights on. I locked my doors and called her again, but this time a guy answered, and asked why I was calling his girlfriend, and why I'm masking my number. I assured him I was dropping off food, and I was calling to ask to meet me at the driveway, because I couldn't see anything past my car's lights. He said prove that I was dropping off food, so I told him to look on the DoorDash app. He will see my GPS location as being there. He turns on the lights and puts this really bright beam of light on me. I couldn't even see. It felt like the sun was in my eyes. He yells, "Show me the food," so I raise it up, and he turns off the beam of light. I tell him this isn't cool and I'm just going to leave his food and go. He told me not to back up because his cousin put some spikes behind me. I looked behind my car to see if I could see anyone, but I didn't. So I get out and put the food a couple feet away from my car, and when I turn to walk back to my car, I notice fucking homemade spikes. So I pull out my pocket knife and tell him to stop playing games. I hear a woman yell, "He has our food." He tells her to shut the hell up, and he will deal with her later. My heart was pounding at this point, and I couldn't really grasp what was going on. So I just got in my car and drove around the strips, going onto the field, which was scary because I didn't want to run over something or mess my car up in any way. As I'm turning around, I see a guy squatting behind a tree, holding something that looked like a bar of some sort. I peeled off and then realized that I almost got knocked unconscious by someone with a damn metal pole. And all because this guy thought I was seeing his girlfriend. I get a call from the guy, but ignore it. He texts me and asks why I ran, and told me his girlfriend is going to suffer now because of me. I reported it, and when the officers got there, they notified me that the RV was not there, and that there was a bag of food on the driveway. I was asked to come into the station and give more details on what had happened. The crazy thing was I got another order days later, going to that exact same location. I accepted it and called the cops because it was the same name as well. They escorted me there, and when we showed up, there was no one. Then I got a call from the customer saying he had forgotten to change his address. He said he hadn't ordered from DoorDash for close to a year. I told him someone ordered from this account a couple nights ago and explained what happened. He sounded terrified when I said there were people in an RV there. He didn't know how someone had access to his account and his phone. I didn't either. The police got into contact with him for questioning. I don't want to say he had anything to do with what happened, but it all seemed very strange to me. I haven't heard anything back on this, and I'm wondering if these people are out there doing this to random delivery drivers. I guess I will never know. This was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. My dad, sister, and I were driving through Arizona. It was the early 90s. I was 8 or 9, and my sister was about 4. I remember we were going through this long stretch of no gas stations. There were several signs saying no gas for X amount of miles. It's clear in my mind because my dad gets super anxious, and I'm kind of an empath, so I was anxious too. He kept talking about how they should put more stations in, and how bad our MPG was. We were driving our old Suburban, and I feel like we were quite a ways down the road. It was dry and hot, middle of the day. We hadn't come across too many cars. My sister was laying on the back seat playing with her dolls, and I was riding shotgun. We come up behind this dirty old RV. It was rusty and there was nothing covering the back window. They had a couple dirt bikes, a generator, and a few gas cans strapped down on the platform. So we're gaining on them and these two heads pop up in the window. It was two boys that seemed to be a little bit older than me. They were straight up hillbillies. They were dirty and missing a few teeth. They started jumping around and waving at us. I waved back. They were super happy about that. My dad started to pass them, but as we were, the driver started speeding up and was now hauling ass. So we fell back. I can feel my dad's worry and anger notching up, but we were seeing the miles until next gas station dropping, so I was feeling positive at this point. I kept looking at the gas gauge. So we're behind the RV again, and the boys are back, doing their little show, making faces, flipping us off, having a grand old time. We're slowing down again. These punks end up dropping their drawers and pressing their asses against the window. My dad floors it and starts passing again. The RV starts speeding up, but my dad doesn't let up, even though he's worried about the gas situation. We finally get a look at the driver. He's Big Daddy Redneck. Uglier, greasier, and missing more teeth. He's having a great time himself. Oh, and also, he has a damn gun, and he's pointing it at us. He's also squeezing into our lane. My dad is forced to back off again. He's trying to stay calm, but I know he's panicking. We slow way down, and so does the RV. The boys are back. Now they've got the gun. They're laughing and taking turns aiming at us. We're going slower and slower. Luckily, my sister has no idea what's going on. We stop. They stop. My dad asks if I can see the license plate. I say I can see the last 3. The platform is blocking it. He says when I punch it, get down. The RV is about 20 feet ahead of us. The boys are still playing cowboy in the window. My dad puts it into reverse and starts backing up. The RV goes into reverse and starts creeping back. Then my dad throws it in drive and punches it. I got down in front of the passenger seat. I feel us swerve and my dad starts yelling, "Yes! Come on, girl, get us out of here." He was laughing like a maniac and I understood why. We got to the first gas station in about 10 minutes. Probably coasted in on fumes. I watched the RV try to catch up with us the entire time, but it could never gain any ground. We pulled into the station, and luckily there were a handful of other cars. We watched the RV drive past the exit, and my dad and I felt a rush of relief. We actually stayed at the station for a bit, filled up the tank, got a bite to eat. I think my dad asked a few people working there if they've ever heard stories of some psycho hillbillies in an RV around here, but I don't know if he got an answer. The rest of our trip went fine and we made it home. I hope one day those assholes messed with the wrong person and it didn't end up so funny. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Links to all my shit are in the description. I want to thank Lizard for helping me with pictures again. She's awesome. Hey, also, real quick, if anyone out there wants to play some fantasy football with me, I have some slots open because I had to get rid of some people. So, if you're interested, either email me at the address in the description or go to my Twitter or Instagram and DM me. And that's about it. I love you guys. And as always, be good to animals, even people. So.
Ja, snälla, Bergsbus, Rish.